Daniel Ricciardo has been making headlines recently, mostly for all the wrong reasons. Many feel his gap with teammate Lando Norris has widened this year, and McLaren CEO Zak Brown hasn't been too positive about Daniel. Daniel Ricciardo has been struggling a lot this year on pace consistency and overall results, and it's not helped by the fact that his teammate Lando is outperforming him on that card this season. At the moment, Lando has 48 points to Daniel's 11, so Lando has brought in 82% of McLaren's points so far this season. Then there's qualifying pace, and on average, Lando is 0.6 of a second quicker in the same car. If we look a little deeper into what's going on here, you'll find out that what we need to understand is Ricciardo's driving style, because it will explain why he was so quick at Red Bull, but not so much at McLaren. Let's now head into the video and find out what McLaren can do to help Daniel Ricciardo and how Lando Norris has discussed his teammates' struggles. But before that, let's see what the team principal and other drivers think about Daniel Ricciardo. As quoted by Racing News 365, McLaren team principal Andrea Seidel started by explaining the performance gap between Daniel and teammate Lando Norris. In general, Daniel says himself he still doesn't feel 100% with the car, especially when it's about pushing it to the absolute limit in qualifying. Andrea Seidel also said that he was competing against a very powerful teammate as well in Lando Norris. He added that when he considered both things together, you can see the disparity that they were sometimes experiencing. Saito also clarified why Daniel was so far off the pace back in Barcelona. We found an issue on the car which gave us an explanation, which was important, and then we learned from that. He signed off by speaking about what they can do for Daniel. All we can do together with Daniel, with a commitment on both sides, is to simply keep working harder in order to find these last percentages. We should mention that Daniel has had some great results with several podiums and even a win back in Monza. However, ultimately, we are looking at one of the drivers with the worst records when compared directly with their teammate, who is obviously working with the same set of tools. So really, it's the gap between Ricciardo and Lando that's interesting. So let's take a look at Ricciardo's driving style from back when the Red Bull was incredibly aerodynamic and able to produce more raw downforce than any other team on the grid. But the Renault engine itself wasn't so great, so they were comparatively quicker in the corners, but slower on the straights. What actually made Ricciardo great in that car was that it fit his style very well. Now we know him as the last of the late breakers, but really that's only when overtaking. When Daniel was on a regular lap, he would draw the brake a bit earlier than most drivers, which benefited him because you could then maintain the vehicle at a more level speed, allowing Daniel to turn in very fiercely and carry a high-medium speed into the corner. As a result, a smoother braking phase kept the car flatter, which the right car allows you to keep the aerodynamics working well throughout the corner, so Daniel would set the car to be very stable on entry. He doesn't want the car moving more around on the way into the corner, according to Blake from Brake F1, who was a performance engineer at Red Bull at the time. Max Verstappen didn't mind the car moving on entry, whereas Daniel didn't really care for it, and this style relies on having a car with great front-end grip because Daniel isn't hard on the brakes through the corner. Skipping forward to when Daniel joined McLaren, and while he was driven two very different cars, the 2021 car and the 2022 car, Daniel has experienced similar issues with both models. It seemed almost as though Daniel couldn't get the car turned, couldn't get it rotated past the apex, and the way he wanted to, he was actually running out of road at the corner exit. So, that would then lead us to think about his performance. We all know that the 2021 McLaren, in contrast to earlier Red Bulls, didn't rotate as well on the corners, which suggests that it may be a slightly weaker front axle, and a more stable rear axle in contrast to the Red Bulls, which typically had a more loose rear axle. Hence, it seems that McLaren has a really strong rear end, which is good on the brakes. However, the results of this is that it can tend to understeer a little bit, and according to various interviews over the last 2 years, this has caused an issue for Daniel. It seems that the understeering issue is the main one, as the Red Bull has a lot of front-end grip, enabling Daniel to roll the car into the corner with a lot of speed without a lot of brake pressure. It really allows more weight over the car's rear for a better exit, but the driver can also run out of the road on the exit, so that's all kinds of adds up, and some drivers were able to adapt this whereas some were not. There were clearly circuits and days where it did work for Daniel, but on the whole it seems that the way the front axle works really doesn't suit Daniel and Daniel's driving style. And the way he likes to rotate the car, particularly when he's doing this kind of classic overtaking move, where he's just straight lines to the apex and gets rotated at the apex while already in front of his rival, and that is a good point. Overtakes are a different style altogether. You're not optimizing for the highest minimum corner speed to a corner or the best run out of it. You're only trying to get ahead of your opponent and block the ideal line, which allows you to then get ahead. So, the style is different there, but what is it that Lando is doing? He seems much happier with a car that is less stable on the brakes and with a little more understeer. One way to drive a car with a hint of understeer is to pull the brakes late and deep into the corner. This puts a lot of load on the front tires all the way into the apex, but removes grip from the rear. This lower rear grip enables a driver to pivot the car on the front axle through the corner, which allows them to then get a good exit, generally speaking. Cars with a hint of understeer are normally much more stable on the power, so the driver can gain time on the exit. And when you look back at Lando's onboard from the last 2 years and in general, he does seem to set up his car with a hint of understeer. This enables him to accelerate more quickly as he exits the corner, which appears to be the deciding factor in this case. Lando and Daniel represent an intriguing partnership, whilst they're still able to draw fans in with their personalities. Lando Norris recently stated to the media, admitting that he took a significant amount of time to adapt to his side of the garage. "I struggled at the beginning of the season, probably with my driving style a bit more than what Daniel struggled with initially in the first few tests, and I feel like I had to adapt quite a bit." He also acknowledged how the drivers are different from one another. He added that some of his feelings were not translated well to his partner, and how they drive their cars is slightly different as well. He said that he prefers a car with much more instability and push force on the fronts, and he also prefers a car that is a little more stable and made with a little more understeer. Lando Norris admitted that this year McLaren cars are a bit different. "I do feel like it's a difficult car to drive," Lando Norris admitted. "You know, I think our characteristics, which he's also had over the past few years, even Carlos Sainz said it, they're quite specific and unique to some of the driving styles you need are not like the ones you kind of grow up learning, and therefore you have to adapt quite a bit, especially this year when the car is a very different and some of the characteristics of last year are gone, and we've introduced some other characteristics, so I've had to change my driving style at the same time. I've also had to adapt to it. It's not just because I've been with McLaren for 4 years that I know this car inside out." Lando is a natural in McLaren's car. It suits him and makes him happier with the car moving around, but if we talk about Daniel, he doesn't really seem to have the confidence in it at the moment. You all can see this in qualifying at Monaco. Daniel is much less confident on the brakes, and you can see it on the way into the key braking zones. Daniel is lifting the brakes where Lando isn't now. There's likely some track progression here, but not nearly a second's worth, so Daniel really isn't confident in that car. However, you could argue that Monaco is pretty typical, so go and take a look at the most typical F1 track at Barcelona. Only time will tell if he's able to adapt and make the changes required this season to generate a little more success. And that's all from today's video. See you in the next video, guys.